Dozens of tsunamis swept across the entire Aegean. They made their way into the Mediterranean.
These massive waves surged towards the unprotected north coast of Crete. First in the firing line was the coastal town of Malia. Just yards from the seashore stood a magnificent palace, its sophisticated structures engineered with the same complex layout as the palace at Knossos. The three-story facade facing north was directly in the path of the approaching waves.
The inhabitants of the region probably gathered here at the palace because they saw this great plume of ash shooting up into the sky off to the north. They would have been visible all the way down to the Nile Delta.
When the ash cloud reached the island, the sky above this ancient Minoan palace turned gray. During excavations on Crete, Alexander McGillivray discovered this volcanic ash in the deepest parts of the palace's ruins. It's a clue to the catastrophic sequence of events that overtook this society.
When the first wave came pushing ashore, bringing with it their fleet, from fishing boats to great trading ships, would have all come crashing through here and gone all the way to the foot of the mountains over there, ripping away at this architecture, rubble and trees and smashed up ships, come crashing back through here and over back into the sea.
This scene of destruction was repeated all along the coast of Crete and far beyond. Not even the brilliant builders of the great reinforced walls at the Palace of Knossos could have foreseen the power of the tremors that accompanied these waves. They rocked the island. Massive earthquakes caused by the volcano shook the palace to its foundations. The devastation of this ancient civilization was complete. Today, long after the destruction that struck the Mediterranean, the search for the links that bind these places to the story of Atlantis has taken a new turn. The final extraordinary clue leads east to the ancient land of Egypt. For the survivors of the largest volcanic eruption in history, life in the Mediterranean became hell on Earth. Thousands were dead. Tsunamis had poisoned the land with salt water, and the air was thick with ash and noxious gases. Just as Plato wrote when he described the end of Atlantis, the island of Santorini, at the center of this newly discovered world, had been destroyed. It had been blown to smithereens, then swallowed by the sea. And 100 miles away, the great palaces of Crete had been devastated by quakes and engulfed by terrible tidal waves. In their search for evidence of the survivors of this devastating cataclysm, our investigators are piecing together the final chapter in the life of this extraordinary civilization.
When the tsunami swept through here and reduced this building behind me to foundation level, the best way for the survivors to cope was to go to the most powerful nation and the wealthiest nation of the time to ask for help.
Alexander McGillivray believes that the survivors turned to their long-term trading partners, the Egyptians.
There may have been people brought in from elsewhere to help with all of this, with the pharaoh in Egypt contributing the wealth and perhaps the manpower.
This close relationship with Egypt is probably the single most important link that researchers have established between this newly discovered civilization and the stories of Atlantis. Because the origin of the story of Atlantis was not Greek, it was Egyptian. In 590 BC, in the holiest shrine of Egypt's capital, the great Greek statesman Solon was shown ancient inscriptions. They date back to almost 1,000 years before, 1450 BC. These documents told of the existence of a civilization of great power and prestige, ruler of all the lands to the west of Egypt. When Solon returned to his homeland, the story of Atlantis became part of Greek folklore, a tale told at parties and passed down through the generations until, in 370 BC, Plato penned his version of this Egyptian tale. Now, on the wall of an Egyptian tomb, researchers have discovered inscriptions that they believe are the original texts that were shown to Solon. It turns out that Solon must have invented the name Atlantis because the Egyptians called the people of this ancient world by another name. That name was Kefchu, and Kefchu is the Egyptian name for the people of Crete, the very island at the heart of this lost world. So what happened to the survivors from this remarkable civilization? There are signs on Crete that the Kefchu did begin to recover after the effects of the catastrophic volcano. But the survivors were dangerously vulnerable, and soon after the catastrophe, warriors from the Greek mainland invaded Crete. The Minoans did not have the strength or the numbers to repel the invaders, and the island fell. This finally spelled the end of one of the greatest civilizations in human history. The sophisticated engineering techniques and the extraordinary architecture that gave them their unique identity disappeared forever. The Greeks went on to dominate the entire Western world. They gave birth to a culture on which Western societies are based, but things could have been so different.
If it weren't for the tsunami and the Theran eruption, we would probably be reading Plato in Minoan. The Minoans would have continued to expand their empire onto the Greek mainland. The White House would probably look more like the Palace at Knossos than classical Greek architecture.
There are still many questions to be answered that could shed light on the links between the great palaces, towns, and temples of Crete and Santorini, and the mysterious legends of the Egyptians' Kefchu and Plato's Atlantis. On Santorini, vast areas wait to be excavated, and the ocean bed remains largely unexplored. But time may be running out. At the heart of the caldera, beneath the towering cliffs of the modern-day Santorini, is the Nea Kamenni, or New Furnace. It is the site of the present volcano, and it is still very much alive. When the volcano collapsed after the eruption 3,500 years ago, it left behind a hole in the ocean 1,000 feet deep. Since that time, the volcano has been growing again, pushing back up through the ocean. Today, it rises 400 feet above sea level, back almost to the size that it was when it erupted 35 centuries ago. Seismologists believe that it will erupt again. The question is when.
When that next big blast comes, the best we can do is hope that we can predict it and get away. If we don't, if we stay here for that next big explosion, we'll be a piece of the volcanic ash deposit.
When the volcano does blow, it will engulf the surrounding islands again, freezing life in a moment of time, burying it under a new layer of volcanic ash. A new lost world will be created.